I think one of the most common mistakes that I see is focusing too much on the technology. So, feeling that the story that the customers want to hear is about the technology evolution and the product that they're so passionate about. In reality, the customer wants to hear what it's going to do for them. So getting to that customer focus and understanding what that solution is going to be for this particular prospect. So that's a very common mistake, and I think it's because it's a very well-intentioned mistake. People, kind of come by that very honestly as entrepreneurs. They're very passionate about their product. It's also a bit of a habit that you need to break. So it's something that you need to kind of practice, thinking about the customer's view and the customer benefit as opposed to the product that your company is offering. Big part of the sales job is really research. So understanding more about the industry that your customer plays in, what the upcoming changes or legislative issues or anything like that affects the industry that your customer is playing in. So, the backdrop for their business. I think there's research that you can do about their business in particular. So annual reports for public companies and different pieces of information that exist in the public domain around that customer and their success or failure as a business at this point in time. So once you've done all of that research, then you have the ability to take that information and use it to frame your solution in a way that is meaningful to the customer. So using that information that you've gathered, you're able to create a compelling vision of how your product could help their situation. It's important to find the message and the analogy that's going to work best for your customer. So it's important for you to find a very clear and compelling message that means something to you as the customer. So the analogy that I use is that if your customer has a bleeding neck wound, then you have the bandage that resolves their bleeding neck wound. And it needs to be that direct of a correlation. So if they have an issue with their shipping department, then you have a very specific solution that's going to improve their shipping process. Or if they have a financial problem and you have a solution that kind of deals with that, a tool that perhaps helps them in that arena. So that compelling description of the solution that you can provide to their business problem is the value proposition that you want to include in your pitch deck. The best way to really build relationships with your customers is to capture feedback and act on it. So if customers see that they have an investment in your company by virtue of a voice that you're using to shape the future of your product direction, as an example, then that's a very positive element to have in your relationship, and it's a connection point between your customer and the product that they are using. So it's important to not waste that resource. So if they have feedback, it can be as simple as creating a survey that's deployed out to customers on a regular basis, or it could be just at contract signing or a year after contract signing, some point in time, or it could be quarterly, or it could be biannually, something like that. So then once you've got that feedback, it's important to kind of bring that in-house and make it a part of a formal process. So it could be a monthly customer feedback meeting that you sit down as a small group and go through. That can also be useful information to share with investors and the board to be able to show them the progression of the product and the voice that the customers are having in its development. I think that it's important to consider closing the contract is a point of departure. It's not a point of arrival. So you're beginning the journey of your relationship with this customer, and it's important to be thinking about it that way. So, if there are any issues that need to be clarified, any kind of, process or steps in the process that you don't feel are clear, investing the time to really take the customer through how things are going to happen and when shipments are going to occur, and make sure that everything is crystal clear so there are no misconceptions or anything that isn't going to meet their expectations. It's also important to make sure that it's a win-win for both parties. So, you often hear people talk about a sales deal where they, kind of had a very profitable deal and they didn't have to discount as much as they were expecting to. And so often in those situations, perhaps the customer doesn't feel that it's as much of a win as the salesperson does, and that won't be a very, kind of happy journey going forward. So from a relationship selling standpoint, you really need to have clarity and make sure that the pricing is good for the customer and the value is good for the customer and that balance is there.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Entrepreneurship 101. This week's topic is sales and business development with Krista Jones. I just wanted to announce the Upstart competition finalists. We just finished the selection process and we have our final 10 from over 30 applicants. They are 180 Urban Solutions, Delightfully Yours, Eve Medical, Henna Heels, Loca Woca, Manfinst, Muse Chem, Ruckies, The Hot Plate, and Virtual Wallet. So we're really, really excited for these 10 companies, and we hope they're just as excited for the competition May 25th. And we invite you all to come and hear their pitches. They'll be working very hard in the next 2 months on perfecting their pitch in order to win the competition. Yeah, is anybody here that is in the Upstart competition? Do you guys want to stand out? Yay, good job. What company? Ruckus. Oh, I know. I did write it down, how to pronounce it, and I still got it wrong. Sorry about that. I wasn't in the meetings with them, so I didn't hear how they said it. So I just wanted to introduce Krista Jones, who will be giving our presentation this evening. We're very delighted to have Krista. She brought the first Sales Entrepreneurship 101 lecture last year, which was actually a really great lecture. If you want to hear more from Krista, she did a really neat skits and had a panel, and it was quite funny because one of her team members was an improv, very active at improv, so they did a great job. Krista is the practice lead of the ICE practice here at Mars, the Information Technologies, Communications, and Entertainment practice. She's also an advisor, and I'm going to read a little bit about her background. She has a wide variety of skills, including a unique combination of technical, operational, and marketing expertise in technology-based businesses. She's known both for her comprehensive knowledge of existing and emerging ICE services infrastructures and her ability to conceptualize. Her ability to conceptualize. Her track record includes creating and executing service developments, next-generation technology implementations, and corporate strategies. She is also a successful entrepreneur with her husband. So it's my honor to welcome Krista to the podium for the Sales and Business Development Lecture.
It's supposed to be here, the clicker. Thanks, Carrie. Well, thank you all. It's not going to be quite the same as last year. I don't have the skits. My improv lady left and is off to bigger and better things, so she's not here to do the skits, and I could not pay anybody enough to fill her place on the stage with me. So I'm hopefully going to just take you through the essence of the presentation is we're going to talk about, and this is business to business, this is enterprise sales. So this is not about acquiring an audience if you're in a consumer-based business. This could be used on the double side of the consumer-based business, which is when you're trying to get a partner or somebody that might be helping you to fund the acquisition of the customers and the client base you want. So I just want to set the stage for the type of businesses that we're talking about. Obviously, all centered in technology-based businesses. So we're going to go through, at the start of the presentation, talking a bit about the types of sales, what it means, how you manage channels, and then I've saved a little bit of time to give you a little bit of a primer on how to do a proper sales pitch, a little bit on the delivery, the behavior in front of the customer. You're going to get a lot more of that in the pitching session that's coming up in the Entrepreneurship 101 program, but just I felt it was important to close with a little bit of what you actually do in the sales call. So the first thing that's really important for everybody to remember is sales is a process, not an activity. It's not a one-time event. It's much like when you're doing a technology-based business. Everybody spends a lot of time on product development and the process for that and software releases. You talk about, the hiring process, but it's really important to manage sales as a process. There's actual steps, there's targeting you have to do, there's a lot of different activities, whether it's sales strategy. And sales strategy is really interesting because you have your corporate strategy, which tells you what your product does and who your target market is. Your sales strategy is how are you actually going to reach those? How are you going to get past the first call? How are you going to get to the second call? How are you going to move it forward? Which ones are your leads? How are you actually going to move through the process? And if you're not managing it as a process and you're dealing with it as, I have a sales call, I'm going to deal with this event. Now what do you expect out of it? Now I have another sales call, I have this event. If you don't have a process associated with it, it's going to be a really hard path to close. If you don't deal with it a process, getting to close is very difficult. The other thing that's really important is your salesperson is not your product developer. Sales requires very specific skills. Playing golf is one of them. But really what's important about sales is that you have to have a certain capability that allows you to be successful. So in one case, if you're a strategist, your skill set is about seeing the broader market and figuring out how things fit in between. If you're a salesperson, you need to know how to become friends with somebody really quickly, how to gain their trust, how to ask probing questions to get information about that enterprise that you can't find. You have to know how to do a lot of background research. You have to be comfortable in a lot of situations. So it is a very specific skill set that's required. So we always encourage people that when you're thinking about sales and the business development, obviously as a startup, usually it's the founders or the original people that start to do it, but it's one of these skills that you very quickly have to acquire inside the organization. Sometimes people are natural at it. I have one lady in a startup who is the most natural cold caller I've ever met. And it amazes me how she can get to certain people. Now that's a skill, not one I particularly have. I do great when somebody's already developed the relationship and I can come in and convince them of a solution. I know that about myself. I know the role I can play. I'm usually the closer in the deal, not the opener. And that's a really important thing for people to realize when you're going through a sales process. One of the other things that is really important when you're thinking about how to do B2B sales is what channel are you going to take? All B2B sales doesn't mean you have to go direct and build every relationship one-on-one with every client. So this is a chart that I like to use because what it does is it shows how you change the relationship that you want with your customer based upon the nature of the product that you're selling. And that is really important because if you're selling a really simple product that has a really low value to it, so the account is not the size of the company, but the size of the company's spend with you. So if your product is something that you're selling and on average the company is going to spend less than $1,000 a year on your product, you are in the small accounts category. Your discretionary spending, usually at the manager's level, you can go retail, you can go online. You cannot afford to have a direct sales force and pay that salary for that person to knock on that door. You have to do it at the beginning, but you can't afford. So that's where you really need to start to look at the online and the retail side of the things. And you go all the way up to the solution selling, which is where you're selling something and it's $500,000 a year, $1 million a year of value, and it's a really complex sale that fundamentally integrates in with a business, then that's when you start to get into really complex and direct sales. So it's really important to understand, and it's also really important to understand that day one, you'll probably have to seed everything with direct sales when you're in B2B. You'll probably have to get your first reference customers, but you need to know that this is where you're going in terms of what you're trying to build. Because if you want to hire somebody to be responsible for sales or business development for you, it's a different person who would lead a solution selling sales force than a person who would be responsible for an online channel. So it's important for you to know who you're hiring right up front, so you have to know where you fit. The next thing is when you get into indirect channels, because there's so many people that are building tech-based businesses and selling to enterprise that say, well, I'm just going to go and get this channel. There's all types of channels that you can use, and you need to understand that each of them provide a very different path to your customer. And what's really important about this is it really doesn't matter who you think is the right partner. It really matters who your customer thinks is the right partner. So you might say, hey, I've got a great technology advantage with this company. And you'd say, we'd be great, we work together, that company's all for it. And you understand that the customer would never ever buy your product through that sort of a channel, because maybe that channel was less services based or more, has a different focus, sells to a different person in the business. It could be that they're selling to the tech person and you have to sell to the business unit owner. So it's really important for you to figure this out and to be able to go to the right type of channel. The other thing that's important and really something that is hard to understand day one is big is not always best. Sometimes if you want, there's lots of channels out there, especially if you have a product into the SMB marketplace, a small to medium size. That's the toughest marketplace to reach. That's the marketplace that is predominantly served via channels. What's really hard in that is to find the channel partner who is going to pay attention to you. If you are just simply another tick on the box of somebody selling, the odds of your product getting bought significantly in the early days without any momentum behind it. You have to be able to manage the channel. You have to put commissions in place. You have to know how to motivate their sales force. So sometimes the smaller guy who really has a really deep and loyal base is the right place to start, because you can develop and get them to be an extension of your company. So that's why it's, you know, the big guys are great. I know lots of companies, they have a list. They signed up, they come in, they have their list, and they put down for everybody, these are all their channel partners. I'm like, how much volume are you driving through that channel? And they're looking at me. And I'm like, well, you have to manage a channel. Just because you have the list, you could still not meet revenue targets no matter how many people you put on if you don't manage the channel appropriately. So that is really important to think through that when you're going through setting up your sales. A sales funnel. You have to have one. There's no way around it. You have to have one. It doesn't matter if it's an Excel spreadsheet. It doesn't matter if you're using Salesforce.com. Pick whatever works for you at the time you're working with it. You actively have to manage it. If you heard Debbie's comment earlier, you have to take the customer through the process. And what's important for everybody to realize is a funnel does just that. There's a 1 in 10 chance of you being successful with that customer at every time. So if you have a business plan that says you need to have 10 customers by year end, how many prospects do you have to be contacting to get to 10 customers as a startup? You have to have at least 1,000 on that list to get to 10. And it's really important. It's a lot of business plans have been built around selling to one customer. Well, that's not a fundable plan, and that's not a realistic plan. You have to have the ability to get to a certain number of clients. Your first 10 are hard. Your next 20 are harder in terms of what you're trying to get to. So that's really important that you manage. And the other thing that's really important is that you put appropriate attention with the appropriate materials at the right time in the funnel. So one of the things, if you notice here, if you go down, custom value proposition is in the third box. It's when you've qualified them. It's not the first time. If you've done your proper strategy and you've created the strategy and you've done the work in targeting the type of companies and you've created the right pitch for them, you should be able to get by with a standard pitch for that vertical or that particular segment you're looking at and not get custom until you get qualified. And the reason behind this is it's your time, right? You need to be, at this stage, you need to be spending your time on generating the demand in the top end of the funnel as opposed to generating a custom proposal for everybody in terms of what you're trying to do. It's really important that you understand that and that you actually blend your material and be honest about where you think the customer is. And one of the other things that's really important for people to realize is there's nothing in it for a potential customer to tell you there's no motivation for them to tell you that they don't think you have a good idea. A lot of customers will just keep saying, yeah, that's a good idea. They're looking at that. They're developing it. A lot of big companies, when you're in the enterprise space, they have groups that are just out there to take meetings and to figure out what's happening. It doesn't mean it's a qualified lead. A qualified lead means that you've actually gone through the organization and somebody somewhere told you that what you're selling is solving a problem that they have budget to fix in the next little while. Note that they have budget to fix in the next little while. Because what's really interesting is anybody who's worked in big enterprise, you will always have a list of 40 problems that they're trying to fix, but they'll have budget for about 4. And so they'll be looking for the solutions to the other one. But if you're not in that budget cycle, I wouldn't waste a lot more time on them. You keep doing it for the next year, but then it goes back into they're your prospects. You keep them on the prospects, you touch them every quarter, and you keep moving it that way. I'm not going to do a lot on web-based selling. The only thing to say is if you're selling online into the retail and the smaller markets, same odds, just different tactics. There's a lot of things out there, a lot of books you can read on web-based selling in terms of what you do. Very effective way to reach certain client sets. Usually helpful if you do strategic partnerships with online channels that are doing it. But you're not going to increase your odds of success because you're online. You still have to instead of spending the time with people generating direct sales leads, you actually have to put the money into marketing and other things to actually generate the same number of traffic to your website. So if you look at this, 1,700 prospective customers hit the website, 165 make a purchase. Same sort of, and you've got to have your website doing that sales funnel for you. Click one, gets them to this stage, hooks them to go to the next one. You have to consciously think, if you've got an online website, what is the process that your customer is going to go through, as opposed to just having to click all over, and think about how you can move them through the selling process as they're looking at your website. Strategic selling. That was that box up at the top that we talked about. A lot of people have solutions in that category. It is complex. There's no way around it. When you have an organization that has over 500 people at the organization, you are into complex selling. And usually what happens is you have 4 different people that you have to be worried about in your sales cycle. At any point in time, one of these people can stop your project dead. And you need to know who they are. It's not okay to just have one. And it's not okay to be selling to a coach, because they actually have no buying capability for you. They could be a really great asset to help you understand the organization, to tell you who owns the budget, to help move you and navigate through there. But they don't have buying, so don't center all your effort on them. Make sure you get from them quickly to the user, to the economic buyer, to the technical buyer. So it's really important to understand, not all of them have the final say, but they all can stop the project. So you have to get them on board, and you have to understand that. It's really, the word on here that's really important is the word honestly. Don't fool yourself by thinking, yeah, the tech guy loves me. Yeah, well, you know what? The tech guy just might have been given a really nice lunch by your competitor. And he thinks that there's something in it for him because he's the one that recommended your competitor versus you, and the user is recommending you. That's the typical trade-off that occurs in large organizations. Is there's some people that come in through the users and some people that come in through the technical guys, and usually it's different recommendations, and it's up to the economic buyer to decide between them. So that's really important for you to make sure that you're not caught out on any of those sides of the strategic sell. Deal structures, many and varied. If you know, the discussion on how to price, where to start, should I do recurring? Should I make it a one-time fee? Should it be a license? Should it be a pilot? How do I do this? What we always say is that there's 3 stages as a startup goes through this in terms of how you need to think of customer acquisition. Think of your first 5 customers as your reference customers. You should really think about the fact that you're going to pay them to use your product. And I don't mean literally in terms of money out the door, but you want them to give you a reference. You want them to actually, so you're going to give it to them at a great discount. You're going to give it to them for free. You're going to ask them to trial it. And in exchange, instead of getting a cash payment, you're going to get them to spend their time giving you a quote, creating a case study if you need to show an ROI and you need to have a calculation for how much time was saved, how much money was saved, how much the process was improved. You figure out what the value is that you want them to test for you, and you put that in to your reference customers. You get those reference customers, that's valuable in fundraising, that's valuable in achieving your next revenue goals in terms of what you want to do. So don't have unrealistic revenue expectations out of your first clients. And don't worry about whether or not you've priced it incorrectly. Because you know what? You will have. It will be wrong. It will be wrong. Because the only way you're going to get your pricing right is by the market telling you. The only way the market's going to tell you is by having people buy your product. And the only way you figure that out is by going through the cycle with them. So you figure it out, you get it your best guess, and then you start to structure it in such a way as you get feedback back in. It's important to start in the ballpark, but don't worry, because you can always, for the early ones, early customer, they did something, it's always easy to change the pricing for the next guy. So we always say your first clients are for reference. Your second set of clients, you're getting to just get revenue in the door. You might lose money on some of them because you don't have all your processes down pat in terms of how you provide that in a cost-effective manner. But it's really important to get the revenue and get the volume at that point. And then what you do is you optimize for margin. So if you think of reference revenue margin, that goes to how you price, that goes to how you acquire, that goes to how you deliver in terms of what you're doing. Because what happens is by the time you get to the margin side of it, you've now learned what the market will bear on the pricing side, and then you can figure out how you actually have to structure the business. So that means you have to fund yourself accordingly. You have to, in software, it's online, you can kind of get to margin quicker than some of the more custom, big-end enterprise deals, but that's really how you need to think about it. So the only thing on deal structure is it's probably, you'll debate this for hours on end, but the bottom line is let your customers lead you to the, and sometimes it's great to just go in, and when they say, how much? You say, we don't know. We think it's worth this in the marketplace. What do you think? Of course they're going to come back and say low, but usually they don't. They'll say, you usually can get some good feedback, especially on your reference customers on that. This is a really important rule to set expectations. It's to set expectations when you hire a salesperson, when you're trying to manage the volume in your funnel to make sure you have enough activity. It's what we say is a 10-3-1 rule, and it applies at every stage. For every 10 cold calls made, you'll probably get to make 3 presentations. You'll probably get to generate 1 sale. But even if you look at that at any stage, that's 1 sale is getting to the, at the end of a first cold call meeting, your sale is you get the next meeting. Somebody says, so you think of it that way. Every step is a win to get through, and you always have to have that actionable step to move yourself through. This is something I've deal with a lot of people who come in and they're really discouraged because they can't get anybody to buy. And that's because most of us need some positive reinforcement, except for some reason good salespeople don't. Because they live for those particular opportunities and they can face that rejection day in and day out and still get through. Because you have to. If you're going to generate those sales, think about how many no's they've taken to get to that one yes. So it is really important that you remember that when you're going through this and you have the right attitude. Don't take it personally. It's business. They're not saying they don't like you. They're just saying right now for their business your product isn't right or your service isn't right. And it doesn't mean that it's forever. It just means that right now that's what it's done. Now in some cases they don't like you, but that's a whole other part of the business because sales is a people process. So at some point it comes to a relationship. The other part which you heard Debbie talk about earlier is value prop is everything. So if you look at the 2 sides of this, this is a really easy one. As a company, I make drills. I sell drills. What problem are you solving for a client? They need a hole. They don't need a drill. They need a hole. And what they need the hole for is many different things, so many different drills will fit. So with this, what we're trying to do with this is get you to think about your business and what you do in terms of the customer problem not your product. And it's this is a simple way of really driving that point home. Because, people, this is a problem that everybody knows. If I need a hole, I got to go get a drill, right? There's kind of probably not a better solution for a hole than a drill. But what's important about this is that you can take something that simple and turn it around. You've got to do it you don't sell the drill, you sell the hole. And your entire pitch needs to be in their language in terms of what they're talking about. So now we're going to move into the actual sales pitch itself. So you got the call. You've made the call, you've got the context, somebody introduced you to somebody, and you've got the meeting. There's some really, really important, seems like mundane things that shouldn't need to be said, but they are really important. Before you go into the meeting, it's really important to know why they're taking the call with you. Are they doing a favor for a friend? Do they have a product or an initiative that you know about, you found out on the internet? You got to know why you're going to see them. You got to know what's in it for them. Why are they taking the meeting? You know why you're taking the meeting, because you think you have the best product for their company to use. But why are they taking the meeting? Because it's really important to be able to position yourself that way. What's the purpose? Is it information gathering? Are they expecting you to show up with a product demo? Are they going to have technical people in the room? Clear on your value proposition for them, for this particular meeting. How long you have. If they've allocated 30 minutes, you need to know that. If they've allocated 2 hours, you need to know that so that you can, and you need to clarify that at the start of the meeting. It's a really important piece to be able to make sure you play into their time. You need to know who they're bringing. Don't be surprised with the president of the company showing up for a meeting that you're there in casual jeans and a jacket. You need to know who they're bringing. It's really important. And if they're bringing their tech guy, you bring your tech guy. If you show up and they've got their technical team there and you can't answer the questions, not good. And you also need to know what the facilities are. These seem like really mundane things, but you need to make sure that if you're expecting a projector, that you told them or you're bringing it. If you're expecting a room that has a whiteboard, you need to make sure that that's clear. These are things that can really make a difference in how the meeting goes in terms of your time that's spent there. The 10 essential slides. Once I show you this, then I'm going to tell you that there's no formula for it. But what's really interesting about this is there's no formula for the content that goes into the slides. You need to cover these slides. The order isn't really as important. I think it's going to depend upon the meeting, and what you need to do is have the base content that then you do slight levels of customization for on top of it because of the meeting that you're having. Don't have one that you expect goes in. If you're going in, it's an introductory meeting, and your team and your credentials and who you are is at the end, well, they're going to be slightly confused, right? Depending on who you're talking to. So you have the list of 10 essential slides that you know. And if you look at this, problem hook, problem explanation, customer impact, what your value proposition is. This is all in their terms. I didn't give you the list of how you make an investor pitch or how you describe your business value to somebody. That's a completely different set of slides. Do not use an investor pitch for a sales pitch. Two very different decks. Completely different things that you put in each deck. And that's a really important point. Use visual communication. The stop sign is one of the best visual communication things out there. But really what it's meant is, you'll see in my slides, I don't have anything on my slides that is under 30 point. And that's a really important piece, is it's not a technical spec. It's not meant to be a description. If you want it to be that, have a handout and give them something that they can take away and read. It's meant to augment. When you're making a presentation and you're making a pitch, it's meant to augment. It should be a diagram of your product. It should be a demo. It should be something visual that they can see, as opposed to a list of words that take every functional feature that you have and list it on the screen. This is not art. This is business. What's really important about that is don't take liberties. Stick to the business value proposition. You can be creative in how you put things together, but it is It is about making it professional and making it about them in terms of what you need to do with them. There's a lot of people that come in and their slides might be a little vague. The visual communications they use aren't really relevant. They're not diagrams. They're still taking things a little too loosely. And you see a lot of that and you get a lot of that because when you get coached on how to do a good investor pitch, you start to get off into a little bit of the art of the investor pitch in terms of what you do. That's not what a sales pitch is. A sales pitch is concrete. It's professional, it's efficient, it's the use of time, it's focused on the customer in terms of what you're doing. They don't need to care that you're creative and that you can problem solve and you can do all that kind of stuff. They just want to know that your product's going to solve their problem. You need to appeal to every individual, to their hearts, to their minds, and to their wallets. And what I mean by their hearts is you need to appeal to their emotional side. If you're listening to them, if you're really listening to them, you're going to find out the problems that they have. The problem that's given them, oh dear. The problems that are keeping them up at nights, that are giving them anxiety in terms of what they're doing. And then you're going to have to appeal to their intellect. And you're going to have to make sure that how you're solving their problem makes sense, that it flows, that the arguments are logical. And then you have to make it cost efficient in terms of what they're doing. If you're going to charge a premium because you have incremental value, that's fine. You have to convince them that the premium's worth the value that they're getting. So you have to make sure that you always keep those things in mind. You have to start strong. There's nothing worse than if you're in a sales meeting and they're taking calls and walking out in the first 10 minutes, you're in trouble. And so that really means that you have to focus on them in the first 10 minutes of the meeting in terms of what you're doing. Not you, not your business, on them, on what's in it for them. Start strong with what it means to them. End strong. Be memorable. Not memorable in a bad way, that they're going to laugh about it when you're out of the room, but memorable in a good way, that they're going to say, he really got that, and have an action. Never leave a meeting without an action. Now, the action could simply be, don't call me ever again. But that shouldn't be the action, and I'm being flippant when I say that. Really, what you're looking for is the close of every meeting, and for them to walk out and say, they really knew what I needed. They really nailed it. They're going to remember that. You don't want them to remember because you were the obnoxious person who never let them talk, and you want to be memorable in a good way. The other thing that's important is every pitch is different. And what's different about it is the customer who's sitting in front of you. And you've got to remember that. So you've got to be careful that you don't use client names, competitor names, things like that are in the deck. You've got to be sensitive to this. It could be subtle changes in your deck. You could have the same deck, but you could just make sure that this guy you're going into is a major competitive with the last one and they're on your customer list. You might want to take it out. You might not want to, depending on your strategy as to how you're going to answer that. But just remember, when you plan to go in, give it the due diligence and the amount of time to plan your session. If you're doing direct sales, even if you're on the web and you're putting things up and you want to give experiences, you've got to make sure that you deal with it. The other thing is, it's not a dialogue. I mean, it's not a debate. Don't get into an argument with the customer. You can have a discussion, you can learn things, you can be respectful, but it's not a debate in terms of what you're doing. So don't come off that way in terms of how you approach it. And that's hard because we're all passionate about the businesses that we're building and we're all passionate that our solution is the best. We know why that other product is bad and we know we get really into making this a one-way communication. And you really have to remember that it's more about them than it is about you. The other thing is your deck is not the script. If the customer is going off script, let them. If the customer, I can remember being in a meeting. I was responsible for North American sales for an Israeli startup. And I used to cringe when I would bring my technical team over because they never knew when to stop selling. And I can remember being in a meeting where the guy said to me, all right, I'm going to call this meeting and we're done and we're going to go like this. And I could not get our CTO to stop talking. In fact, by the end of him talking, he had convinced the guy not to move with the project he had budget for, but to go and try to get budget for a bigger project because our product could do so much more. And the CTO left the meeting thinking that was an absolute fantastic meeting. And I was like, we're not going to get this done this year. You just ruined the sale. And he said, why? I said, because he punted us over to the strategy group now. He's going to go and find somebody to do the money he had budgeted for. And sure enough, that's exactly what happened. Instead of just taking the sale, taking the smaller project, getting in the door, and then upselling them on the features once you've had cash and you're installed in their network, instead, he punted us over to strategy. And then we were part of their long-term look at strategy, and we're going to be a cornerstone. And I'm like, okay, that's 18 to 24 months. We'll be out of business before we get that deal if we don't start closing some, right, in terms of what we're doing. And so that's little things that you have to remember about. Take the deal that's in front of you. Honesty is the only policy. It's really important not to, we all oversell. I had one of the charts I took out is that anybody seen the sales tire swing about what the customer wanted and what engineering design and what the sales guy sold, and it's this big. It's really honesty as a startup is the only policy. What do you have ready? What will be ready by when? What can you do? Because if you can't meet their needs, you should be clear about that, because if not, you're not going to get what you need out of the customer. Sales is a people process. It's not, you cannot do this behind a telephone. You can do it online, but if you're in enterprise selling, you need to get out there and meet people. You need to go to places, you need to be comfortable in meetings, you need to go through, and you need to make sure that you're appealing to the people in the process. And don't assume that the technology is going to speak for itself. It's really important. This one, it's kind of been a theme throughout. You heard it in Debbie. You kind of hear a lot of what I'm saying about know who you're pitching. There's 3 levels to knowing who you're pitching. You got to know the company, its strategy. You got to know the department and the particular functionality, and you have to know the individual. And that's what, when you get in, when you know all 3 of those and you can position yourself with all 3 of those, you are in a good position to make that sale. Expect to be interrupted. You're selling to them. They will interrupt, they will ask questions. Let them ask questions, let them take you. If it's really important for them to understand something, make sure you take the time to answer it for them. Allocate a lot, check back on the timing. Tell them that you'll answer it later, but don't ignore the interruptions. And don't act like the smartest person. You don't know their business. You don't know that this guy has just left his boss's office and had his, I was going to swear, but maybe I shouldn't. He's been chewed out for something, and he's coming into the meeting in a bad mood. He's probably had 4 people in there. You don't know what it is. So if you're going to, don't act like the smartest person in the room. Don't keep telling them you know the answers. Deal with it in a, speak simply. Don't come in there and talk. Like I was laughing. I had a guy doing a pitch the other day, and he started at the beginning of the presentation. He says, okay, we're mobile, we're location, and we're social. I said it, we're done. That's the buzzwords. Now let's get at the, because that's, you know, everybody, every pitch that's up there, everybody says they're mobile, they've got location-based, and they're social. It's like, okay. But let me tell you really, really and simply the value that I'm going to bring, as opposed to simply using the buzzwords. And that's what's really important, is to get away from that and to get at the core business functionality that you're offering. Avoid granular product detail. Demos are great. Do not put up a spec sheet on your presentation. Hand it out if that's important in terms of what you're doing. Have it so that you can send it to them as an attachment for the technical guys that want to do it. Don't put it up with an economic buyer. Don't put it up with a user buyer. Only talk to them about the experience they're going to have. Only do it with the tech guys. Oops. You don't have to know everything. Let the customer talk. You've done your homework, you've done the stuff, but you can't learn everything about them from your prep work going in. So you have to have exploratory meetings as part of the sales process. Go in there expecting it, expecting that you don't know everything about them and that you want to let them talk. And you want to make sure that you're gathering that information. Consider it a learning experience. Like if you learn something, if you pick up something about a project that's going on that you didn't know about, or something that's really bothering them, it's a learning experience. You could learn a feature that you didn't think of that is really important to the buying decision for this customer. And then you could start to test whether that missing feature is required at other customers as you go through. So every time you meet with a client, you need to treat it as a learning experience, and you need to deal with it in that way. This is, I think this is my last slide, and I'm going to actually be just under, which is great. It's a skill. Not everybody is good at it, and recognize that. You know, it's asking. You know, I had a boss once, and I didn't just have a boss once. I had a boss a lot of times, but in this particular boss I had, he said to me, "It's understanding when to ask for the deal." When you think your company's done enough, as opposed to them sending you, you've done all this stuff, and then they send you to do one more thing, and then they send you to do one more thing. That's a judgment skill that is really difficult to be able to say, you know what, no, time out. I'm not doing one more meeting. I'm not doing one more stuff. I've answered all your questions. I've passed the technical test. I've done the stuff. You're either going to buy from me or I'm going to move on. This pitching and selling is a very particular skill, and you have to know how to do that. So get good counsel, get help. Don't be afraid. You have to know when to ask for the deal in enterprise sales. It's really important. Sometimes it's clear. They've got a buying process. The customer's driving it. Oftentimes it's not, and it's up to you. And usually startups get caught into this when they're chasing the big fish. They're chasing the Fortune 500 big company that's going to make their revenue for the next 2 years when they bring it in. And they spend more than half their time chasing that, as opposed to the 10 or 15 other people that are in the pipe and can get it done. And they waste a lot of their energy at that. So this is a skill. You have to practice. You have to talk through it. You have to do it one time, fail at it, get the next one, understand. But understand, don't just keep trying to doing the same thing every time and continuing to fail, because you'll learn. And that's what's really important about how you treat a lot of the sales in terms of what's. The last thing I'm going to leave you with is listen. Listen, listen, listen to your customer. You have 2 ears, you have 1 mouth. There's a reason that they're in that quantity on your head. Use them that way. And it's especially in a meeting. It's really important. If you've done, unless of course you're doing a technical presentation or something, but if you're actually in the business meeting and you're talking pricing and you're doing that, and you're talking more than your client, you're not close to sell. If they're talking and asking questions and finding out stuff, you're in a better situation. Even exploratory early on. If you don't get them talking about their budgets and their problems and what they need to do, you're not going to leave there any smarter. You're not going to know what key things to target on the next time you're up in front of them. So these are really important tidbits. I love the fact that this little girl has her listening ears on. And if you have children, you know that that's really hard to get their listening ears to come on. So that's sales and biz dev. Any questions? You guys are all ready to go and make your first big pitch, or you know what you're doing? B2C sales. Some of the differences between B2C sales and B2B sales. So when you're consumer generation is mass acquisition in terms of what you're doing. It's all about appealing to the masses, and it's marketing and it's advertising, and it's very rarely one-to-one in terms of what you're doing from a business to consumer type selling. So it is audience generation is a very, very different skill set that this applies. Most of what I've talked about today applies when you have a business, an online business, take for example, that has a component that is generating an audience, but then what you're doing with that audience is you're monetizing it through a particular partner who's going to pay for access to that audience, whether it's an advertiser or whether it's a sponsor that you want to get. So you would use these skills on that side of the business in terms of matching what your audience and your product, because at that point your product is the audience. But when you start getting into audience generation, I actually think that should be a whole new segment. I know that we're planning on launching a couple of workshops on audience generation for online and mobile startups in the next little while.
As you think about strategic selling and you think about your customer, sometimes they'll have an internally mandated number of vendors that they need to look at. And I'm wondering about if you have any tips or tells as to when you're being included to meet the quorum so they can get the 3 quotes they need to go with their favorite versus being a true horse in the race.
Good question. That goes to one of those particular nuances and sales skills that you develop over time. But really, how I've always seen myself or other people approach that is you can usually tell when all they want is the quote. When they just keep giving you an RFP or they really aren't really interested in talking about anything, they're like, just give me a quote in, I just need a quote. You can usually say at that point, you know, are you using me to drive down the other guy in terms of what happens? Sometimes though, what's interesting in those situations and the instinctive nature of that is something that you will develop with a radar over time, is sometimes what's happening is they really want to choose you because you're technically superior, but they're limited by their purchasing department who has qualified vendors that they're able to buy from. And so usually, sometimes in that case, when they're asking you for the quote, what they want to do is prove that you have more capability for the money. But it's one of those, it's more just instinctual in terms of really trying to talk to them and understanding if there's a real opportunity for you. So I know that wasn't very helpful because there's no formula for it.
Yeah, thank you for your presentation. Wonder if you could talk about, as you were talking to customer, you have customers on one side and then you have your product and service on the other side. And both of these sort of move together in some sense. And I wonder if you could talk about just their relationship and their correlation in terms of which come first, or they probably go together in some sense, but you develop in your customer and to some extent you develop in your product and your services. If you could just maybe talk a little bit about just how they relate to one another as they move along, that'd be good. So
good product design incorporates customer feedback the entire way. Usually it's going to be one of those it depends answers. Sometimes what happens is that you're in a company that has developed a certain technology that has many different uses. And platform technologies are usually the hardest ones for companies to figure out how to sell. And the reason for that is you get in, you buy into that Kool-Aid and you tend to get into that situation that I described earlier about thinking it solves everybody's problems and following everything. So what's really important is for you to take customer feedback, and this is a whole, you just had the product design best practice is tomorrow. So the product design best practice is happening tomorrow, and that's a really important one because there are specific techniques that you need to do to move that information from the customer side of the business into the product design and how you incorporate that. And it's interesting because if you look at communication infrastructures were built by companies who develop feature upon feature upon feature. So if you look at the capabilities inside a telephone infrastructure and the amount of features that go unused inside that infrastructure is quite amazing in terms of the cost. And it drove up the whole cost of that entire infrastructure because it was built without, for the last 100 years, without direct customer input in terms of what they're doing. So it's really it's really, to me, it's fundamentally product design needs to be built with feedback from the customer coming in. And one of the things that's the hardest thing to do is to know when to stop. So it's when do you have enough? Because what I've seen in a lot of companies, and that's what customers can tell you, is, and that's what I was talking about earlier, is when you're in asking them, is you have a feature roadmap and you've got 7 of the 10 features done. Can you launch? Well, if you've solved the problem that the customer has that they're trying to solve with your product, and the rest of it is just the nice to haves on top of it, you've solved it. So the only way you can know that is by talking to your customer and saying, here's all the features, I'm here, does this solve the problem? And you have to have that feedback loop built in to your product design. So to me, if you're not out talking to customers early, before you even have a product, many customers will have exploratory meetings with you and talk to you and say, what if it did this? What if it did that? If they know that that's what you're doing, is wanting to build a product with them. So you have those focus groups and stuff early on in your product design. So really the question is a product design evolution question and not a sales question, right? Because what you want to do, if you've built the product properly, then your value prop and everything should flow nicely out of it. So I suggest you go to the product design workshop. Because that's a whole other category of things. Any other questions? Oh, while you come to the mic, maybe here. Go ahead.
So where you're in a situation, you're talking to the customer, and maybe they're paying you a little bit of money, but not nearly enough. How do you know, are there things that the customer can tell you that set bells off in your head saying, no, time to disengage, time to disengage, to prevent you from spending too much time and not stretching the time for giving the customer?
Phrases are things that they could say. Let me think through that. Absolutely, they will give you buying signals and keep doing that. One of the key signals to me has always been who else they'll introduce you to. So if they're keeping you fairly contained in a group, I usually worry about that, because then that means that you're not going mainstream. Like if the technology group is keeping you housed inside the technology group and they haven't really brought the users or the people in to the equation, you know that you're probably far away from making the big sale and closing the big one. If you're in with the user group and they're loving your product and they're doing that stuff and they haven't said to you, hey, I think we need to get an assessment with my technology folks or with somebody, you kind of start to get the feeling that you're still just in exploratory with a group that doesn't really have buying, either the immediate buying need or the immediate budget support for things that they need to do. And if they're paying you a little bit of money and it's a trial, and you can't get them to move past the trial, then I would be asking the questions of, is the trial solving their problems? Have they put enough resources on the trial if they're saying to you, you know, I can't get the next person in? That's the types of stuff I would be watching for. Is that helpful? Does that? Sorry, over here?
Yes. So I have a product in the, it's a B2B product in the advertising industry. And there's a conference coming up next month that I'm going to be going to and just walking the floor. And I'm wondering if you have any tips about, walking the floor, because I've never done that before as a salesperson. So
I'm going to ask a couple of questions for clarification. So is it a conference where you're expecting to meet customers, or are you expecting to see competitors?
I think it'll be a bit of both, but what I'd like to get out of it is meet sort of the top of the sales funnel, right? And
so you're going there from a prospecting perspective.
Exactly.
Because there's use of trade shows is fabulous, especially in the early days of launching a product. Even if you don't have your product ready, going to trade shows that are in your industry and seeing what everybody else is talking about is really helpful from a competitive intel perspective in terms of what you need to do. But when you're going there from a prospecting perspective, what you need to have is, if you go back to my funnel and you go back to the list I had, there's the criteria in terms of some sample things. You have to be able to have them walk away with some sample, like something in their hand to trigger the memory with you afterwards. So it's going to be really important for you to have collateral to give them, not just a business card. Because they're going to leave a conference and they're going to have 1,000 business cards and they're going to be trying to say, now, was that guy the one that did that? Or was, like, if you just think about it. So you need to have, don't go there and expect to be prospecting if you can't do and give them something. Now, and the other thing is, you've got to ask for something from them. You have to get their contact info. You have to get some way of connecting with them next. So that's really what you're doing when you're walking the floor and you're trying to do that and you're meeting people. And the good trick for that too is that you don't have to take a booth. You can have a room in the hotel or something like that that's cheaper for you to have some meetings if you can. Because the more you can, if the conference is a 4-day thing, if you can meet a whole bunch of people on the first day and maybe set times to do a product demo or do different things, you don't have to have a booth to be there. You can do it in a separate area because that's usually what the people are going there for as well.
Excellent. Okay, thank you.
Your process starts with cold calling. Everybody hates cold calling. What is the best advice you can give to start a cold call and not sound like a telemarketer?
And not sound like a telemarketer?
Yeah.
Have done some due diligence on the business. If you cold call somebody and you immediately say, hi, I'm so-and-so and here's the product that I have, you're dead. Mm-hmm. If you because the odds of you getting to the right person who would understand what your value prop is and be able to relate that to a problem that they have, as much as if your cold calling is all about the pre-work that you've done to justify the call. Okay. I saw you in a press release. I know that you're worried about this. I've got a product that helps you solve it. I read your annual report. I know you're working on this, so I think your business, this project that you talked about. I'm doing this. I know your businesses are being hit by the recession hard, and I've got a good product. So you have to start with what's in it for them on the cold call. If you start with what's in it for you, you're a telemarketer. Yeah. You're dialing for dollars, and they're going to hang up on you pretty quickly. But so you got to get their, you got to get their attention. And if you're cold calling, depending on what level you're cold calling at, odds are you're going to get to the assistant. Right. So you have to make the assistant think that you really know what's going on inside the business so that they better put your name in front of their... So the only way you do that is by knowing a little bit about the business. Mm-hmm. And so that's what's hard about it in terms of what you're doing. I mean, I don't know any other way to do that.
No, thank you.
Is that good? Thank you.